guys, welcome back to the channel, or welcome if you're new here. My name is Chloe and on this channel we talk about all things books. It is the end of another month and that means we have another monthly wrap up. February was the month of love on this channel, so I read tons and tons of romance books to try and tick a few off of the TBR. And I think I did pretty good. So I read a total of 10 books. 6 of them were physical books and 4 were audiobooks. I managed to read everything on my TBR with the exception of one book. The only one that I didn't get round to was Fallen Hard for the Royal Guard, because to be honest with you, by the end of the month and after my 24-hour readathon, I was all romanced out. I just couldn't read another book, let alone another romance book. It wasn't happening, so I had to give myself a couple of days break at the end. But it's fine. I think 10 books is more than enough in 1 month. So I'm going to start with the physical books and then we'll swap on to the audiobooks. The first physical book I have then is Love on the Brain by Ali Hazelwood. Guys, this book, it wasn't for me. It wasn't my favourite Ali Hazelwood book. I don't really know what to say about it. I'm trying not to be mean with any of my reviews, but I really did not enjoy it. I ended up giving this book 2 stars, and honestly, looking back at it, I feel like that might be a little bit generous. So this is another book in Ali Hazelwood's STEM series, and it follows main character B, who is a neuroscientist, and Levi, who's an engineer, and they've both been commissioned to work on a project for NASA. So this is pitched as being enemies to lovers, obviously, as most of them are. The 2 main characters knew each other back in college. He hated her for very unclear reasons, and then it turned out that he actually didn't hate her. She made it all up in her head, and they start working together. Obviously they get together, but then the end, you know how in a romance where you get this like 3rd act conflict where they break up and then they reunite. If you have read this book, then you'll understand, but it is the most bizarre ending to a book I have ever read in my entire life. Honestly, I was reading through this, it was like a soap opera and not a very well written one. You know how like when you're scrolling online and you see these like Korean melodrama films and the storyline is just so outrageous that it doesn't even make sense? That's what this is. It just took a completely wild turn out of nowhere. There was guys with guns and feral cats coming to the rescue, and it was just so bizarre. The main character B was so irritating throughout it as well. I didn't enjoy her. Levi was trying to be like the previous protagonists, like Adam in the first one, The Love Hypothesis, but it wasn't like dark and broody and mysterious. It was just straight up rude, and it was so infuriating to read. They had no chemistry whatsoever, in my opinion. The whole thing just felt so forced. And wow, that ending, I still just can't believe that was the end to this book. Honestly, if you have read this, please let me know what you thought of it, because I was so lost for most of it, wondering what the heck. I actually thought at one point that someone had spiked my tea, because there was no way that is how that story went on purpose, but it did. So yeah, this wasn't for me. It was 2 stars, and honestly it's kind of put me off reading Ali Hazelwood for a little while, but I do still have Loath to Love You, which is a short story collection, so I'll need to get to that at some point, but definitely not anytime soon. Next up we have Take a Hint, Danny Brown by Talia Hibbert. This is book 2 in the Brown Sisters trilogy, although it's not technically a trilogy, they're just companion novels. So The first one, Get a Life, Chloe Brown, follows Chloe Brown, who's the oldest of these three sisters, and then this one follows the middle child, Danny. She is a professor and PhD student at a university, and Zaf, the love interest, is an ex-rugby player turned security guard in the building that she teaches in. And after a fire drill goes wrong, he is filmed carrying her out of the building like the knight in shining armour that he is, and they turn into a viral sensation. But Zaf also runs a charity for men's mental health, or boys' mental health in sports. And so in order to try and gain some publicity for the charity, he asks Danny if they can keep up this ruse of being the internet's golden couple for a little while. So they enter into a fake dating arrangement. I love fake dating. In romance, it's probably one of my favourite tropes. And this one is just done so incredibly well. I love Talia Hibbert's writing. The banter between them is so funny. They are both just so sweet. Zaf is probably one of my favourite book boyfriends. He is just the sweetest. And at no point did any of this feel like an eye roll. You know, like this. When you get to the third act conflict in that, I was rolling my eyes so hard. But with this, it actually kind of made sense. Like, you could see where the tension came from and it felt realistic. But at no point was there ever any miscommunication. They were really good at talking it out with one another, and I love that. Miscommunication is one of the most frustrating romance tropes ever. But thankfully this one avoided it. So I highly recommend this book. I ended up giving it 4 stars, which I think is what I gave Get a Life, Chloe Brown. I think it was 2 years ago that I read it, but I'm pretty sure I gave that 4 stars as well. And I'm very much looking forward to getting to the third book. I then read The Soulmate Equation by Christina Lauren. Now, I was so late to the Christina Lauren train. This is the first of their books that I have read. And can I just say, what an introduction. I loved this book. I ended up giving it 4 stars and I really, really enjoyed it. So this is about our 2 main characters, Jess and River, which... weird character names is a little bit of a bugbear of mine, but you know what? We're gonna go with it, okay? His name is River. Moving on. So Jess is a single mum, she's a freelance statistician, and River is a geneticist. And River and his company have created a dating app that matches you with your perfect match based on your genetics. So Jess and her friend sign up to the app, they send in their DNA samples. Jess a little bit more begrudgingly than her friend, but she gets an unheard of 98% match with dun 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 River himself. And so they then enter into an agreement, again for the publicity of the company, to just get to know each other, just, you know, see where this goes, how things play out. And of course it's really good for the investors if one of their own creators found a match with the company. This is just such a fun ride. I really, really enjoyed this one. I loved how the romance between Jess and River played out, and Jess obviously being a single mum as well, it wasn't just a case of something that I find happens quite a lot in romance books is it's just the 2 main characters and everyone else gets pushed to the side, but Jess was still very much a mum in this story. You know, her daughter came first and there was a big discussion of whether or not she even wanted her to meet River in the first place, whether she wanted her to be involved at all, and that was her main priority regardless of everything else that was going on. And it just felt very realistic. It wasn't this whirlwind romance that just completely swept everyone off of their feet and they rode off into the sunset together. There was a lot of things to consider before they could do that. And honestly, at the end of it, it just felt so nice. It felt like Jess finally got her happy ending that she really deserved. After all of the other shit that she has to put up with in her life. She has a very chaotic family life. Obviously, like I said, she's a single mum. She lives with her she was brought up by her grandparents and she lives across from them now, who obviously help her with childcare. One of the grandparents falls ill in the middle of it. Her mum is totally deadbeat and not really in the picture, but pops up every now and then when she wants something. She has a lot of pressure with work and money struggles, and honestly, she is fighting the good fight and she is clinging on in there, she's hanging on in there, and it just felt so rewarding for her at the end to just finally catch a break. I felt relieved for her. It was such a sweet story. I really, really enjoyed seeing how these characters developed, how their relationship developed, and if you haven't read The Soulmate Equation, I highly, highly recommend it. This is probably one of the very few romance books that I could say I genuinely enjoyed reading. On the other hand, we then have The Roommate by Rosie Danan, and I did not enjoy reading this one at all. This one I thought would have been quite funny. I went into this expecting it to be quite humorous, but it was honestly just irritating. So we've got the main character Clara, who is from a very well-to-do Greenwich family, and at the start of the novel she completely upends her life and moves to LA to go and live with her childhood crush. However, he's a total arse, and as soon as she gets to the house that they're supposed to be flat sharing together, he's like, by the way, my band's gonna go on tour like now, and I'm not gonna see you for 3 months, so I've rented out my room to a complete stranger on the internet who may or may not be a serial killer, but that's not my problem because you're gonna be the one dealing with it, so I'll see you later. Bye. What a dick, first of all. But secondly, he didn't turn out to be a serial killer, he's actually a porn star. So she ends up living with Josh, Mr. Internet Stranger, who is a porn star. And she is obviously a very... What's the nicest way of saying this? She's very innocent, very naive. But not in a naive and innocent and not in an endearing way, in a way that just makes you kind of roll your eyes. Like, this woman is 27 years old and blushes when you say the word sex, or giggles at the mention of any body part. You know, it's just a little bit, it's a bit silly. And again, the plot of it just seems a little bit odd. So she's a trust fund baby. He is about to lose his job in the porn industry because he doesn't agree with the big corporation that's running it, and he does something that they didn't want him to do. And so they decide to make their own business funded by her trust fund, and create a website that's all about women and women's pleasure and how you shouldn't be ashamed of that, which, okay, great, fine. But for someone who blushes at the mere thought of showing a little bit of ankle, it's just incredibly irritating listening to her having to go through all of the motions and all of the interviews and whatnot with all of the adult entertainers that are going to be part of their endeavour. She was honestly the most frustrating and irritating character in the whole thing. If the main character Clara was not in this book, it would be a much better book. I'm just gonna say it. Josh was fine. Some of the side characters, again, they were okay, but they all felt very two-dimensional. There wasn't really much substance to them. The plot was just a little bit boring. The pacing was fine. It was a pretty quick read, but it all just felt a bit daft. The conflict in it as well was really stupid. I didn't enjoy it, if I'm being honest, as you can tell. I gave it 2 stars. It's probably a 1 star though, to be fair. I can't honestly pick out anything that I enjoyed about this book, so I think I actually might demote my rating down to a 1 star, but yeah, this was not for me. The next physical book I read then was Icebreaker by Hannah Grace. I enjoyed this one a lot more than I thought I would. If you watched my 24-hour readathon, then this was one of the books that I read in it, along with The Roommate and my next one. But I was a little bit apprehensive going into this because I knew from TikTok hype that it was really spicy. But I didn't think it was spicy in the sense of the content being explicit. There was just a lot of sex scenes. Like, these two were going at it every chapter. And so, to be fair, by the end I was just sort of skimming through the spicy parts because it was all very much the same. There wasn't any new information that I hadn't already been given 20 times previously. So if you take out the obscene amount of sex that the two of them had, the story was actually very good and really enjoyable. This is about main characters Anastasia, or Stassi, and Nate. Stassi is a figure skater, Nate is a hockey player. And when Stassi's skating partner has an injury and she can't practice with him, Nate steps up and helps her in her training because they're coming up to a major competition and she can't afford to take time out for him to recover. So it kind of, I thought, was pitched as enemies to lovers, but at no point were they two enemies other than a very stereotypical figure skaters hate hockey players and therefore I hate you at the start. But honestly, it was just more playful than anything. Neither of them really hated each other in a serious way at all. It all just felt very playful, very bantery. But I loved how the relationship between them developed. I enjoyed the story arc, the epilogue at the end, the 2 years later bit. I love it when we get a follow-up from the characters. The ending was really cute. I enjoyed that especially. Again, the conflict in it didn't feel too unrealistic. My only complaint is that it's quite a long book and I don't feel like it really needed to be as long as it was. You know? Another thing that I thought was a bit odd was Stassi's skating partner, Aaron, is kind of pegged throughout it as being the bad guy, but it's not really clear what his motivations for his actions were. Like, I don't understand why he did what he did. We didn't really get any sort of explanation for any of that. It felt like he was just being used to create tension without it actually making much sense at some points, especially in the beginning, because Stassi says explicitly within the first page or two that her and Aaron are really good friends. It's always been a platonic friendship. Is that his name, or do I just keep calling him Aaron? Yeah, it is. So yeah, at the start she explicitly says that they're really good friends. It's always been a platonic friendship. They're skating partners, and her boyfriends or hookups have always been fine with that, and they always have a really good, solid foundation for their friendship. But then they have a bit of a falling out when the two main characters get together, and he just turns into this awful person, and it kind of feels like it came out of left field a little bit with no obvious explanation or reason. So that was my only complaint, but overall I really enjoyed the story. It was just a very typical bog standard sports romance though, so I mean, it's not like a standout by any means. I think I gave it 3 stars, but I'd probably say it falls in the 3.5 star for enjoyment range for me. So yeah, definitely recommend it. I can see why everybody likes it, why it's so big on TikTok. It is a good book, surprisingly. Just some parts of it didn't make sense, and there's a lot of unnecessary sex. Like, you don't need to be doing it that often. So like I said, but feel free to like skip those parts, because I didn't outright skip them. I just skimmed through them because, like I said, there's no new information. You guys are doing the exact same thing over and over again. Just saying. Moving on. The last book I finished then, or the last physical book I finished, was The Unbecoming of Mara Dyer by Michelle Hodkin. Wow. When I finished the 24-hour readathon, I think I was 300 pages into this. And I took a couple of days break and I finished it the night before. This was teenage me's dream come true in a book. If I had read this when I was like 12, I would have lapped it up. I would have been all over this book. But adult me, not so much. It is just jam-packed full of YA tropes, and they're not done particularly well. So it's a paranormal romance. So we have Mara Dyer, and then the love interest in it is called Noah. Now, at the start of the book, Mara is involved in an accident and 3 of her friends are killed. And she is obviously suffering with PTSD from that. It was very, very traumatizing. But then supernatural things start happening. Like, she seems to always be there when people end up dead. And she's not really sure what's going on. There's large periods of time where she just blacks out and she doesn't remember what happened or how she got to certain places. And she starts going to therapy. Her mum, I'm sure it said at the start, her mum was a psychiatrist or something. But then just seems a bit useless. Anyway, her mum wants to have her committed. She obviously doesn't want to be, so she suggests, well, maybe this is all happening because there's just too many memories in this town that we live in, so they all up sticks and move to Florida. And that is where she meets Noah, our love interest, who is just such a typical YA. He's almost like a caricature of every love interest in every book ever. He is this sexy, British, mysterious figure who doesn't like any girls until he sets eyes on Mara, and then all of a sudden everything changes and his whole entire world centers around her. He has got messy hair and he's dishevelled and he wears quirky t-shirts under his dress shirts at school, which, by the way, as someone from the UK who has been to Florida, there is absolutely no way on this earth any of us are wearing multiple layers in that hellscape. It is so freaking hot and humid in Florida, and it is not that here. We are not equipped to deal with that kind of weather, and no self-respecting Brit is wearing multiple layers in that heat. That's possibly the most unrealistic thing out of this entire book, okay? It's not happening. I don't care what anyone says. We're not wearing t-shirts and then dress shirts and blazers over the top in freaking Florida. Like, get a grip. It's just, no. But anyway, Mara is the quintessential YA heroine. She's plain, brunette, and nobody likes her just because she's a new girl, and all of the popular girls with their luscious blonde hair instantly hate her because Noah is giving her all of his attention and wants to be with her. I mean, people she hasn't even met or doesn't even know are like banging into her in the hallways and knocking books out of her hand just because Noah is her boyfriend. It's ridiculous. It's totally just crazy. There's also a bit in it where he takes her to a restaurant. Oh, and by the way, he's like a cajillionaire, but you wouldn't know because he's just so down to earth. Like, the guy walks around with like 8 grand in his wallet. What the heck? No, stop it. That's just ridiculous. But they go to a restaurant and she's flicking through the menu and he plucks it out of her hand and orders for her. If someone done that to me, I would be so angry. That's so rude. But also, he just orders. Now, I have an egg allergy. Like, as in to the point of if I even look at an egg, I'll just spontaneously combust. So, if someone done that for me, I would probably be unalived very quickly. Like, that's not realistic. We didn't stop to consider any allergies or intolerances here. It's just so ridiculously unrealistic, and this kid is like quoting paragraphs from Lolita, and he's very full of his own self-importance and kind of arrogant, and I think it was done in such a way to try and be like dry, sort of sarcastic British humour, but it just made him sound like a bit of a dick, like he was a total arse. It kind of ends on a little bit of a cliffhanger that was just a bit, kind of just fell a bit flat, to be honest. Like, it didn't make me go, oh my god, I have to pick up the next book. It was just kind of like, well, that's done. I unfortunately, however, own the next book and do need to read it, but I can't say that I'm in a rush. Let's just put it that way. I ended up giving Mara Dyer 2 stars, and I think that, yeah, it started out quite good. I was very interested in the whole mystery behind what what had gone on with her friends, because obviously she wakes up in the hospital at the very start of the book and she's not really sure what happened or why she's there. And so her memories sort of unfold as the book goes on. And so that aspect of it was quite interesting. But when all of those jigsaw pieces started getting put into place, it was just a little bit underwhelming. And then the story started to take on a little bit of an acid dream type feel towards the end, where random stuff was happening and there didn't really seem to be any rhyme or reason for it. Like, it just came out of nowhere. So I think if I had read this back in 2011 when I got it, I would have loved it. I would have been all over it, but I am just too old for it now. I have outgrown the demographic that this book is geared towards, unfortunately, as much as it pains me to say. But yeah, it wasn't for me. I'll read the next one just because I have it and I want to try and get to a 0 TBR this year, but it definitely isn't making a favourites list anytime soon, that's for sure. However, a book that is making my favourites list is Book Lovers by Emily Henry. This is the first of the audiobooks that I listened to this month, and I think it might now be my favourite Emily Henry book. Yeah, I'm just going to go out and say it. Yeah, I think this is my favourite Emily Henry. So this is about our main characters, Nora and Charlie, who is, Nora is like a cutthroat literary agent and Charlie is an editor, and Nora's workplace nemesis, I guess if you could say. However, Nora and her sister decide to go on a vacation to a small town just to get away from life in general. And whilst they're there, they run into Charlie, and it turns out that Charlie is actually from said small town. I really enjoyed the fact that Nora wasn't a typical romance heroine. So she has gone through some pretty awful breakups in the past, and she's kind of a bit of a cynic. She doesn't really believe in the whole finding your true love, because her previous boyfriends have all had that small town romance. She has always been the horrible city living girlfriend that they all leave for their super cutesy small town romance new love interest, and they dump her and up sticks their whole lives and move to whatever small town ranch that their girlfriend runs with their family, who also own a Christmas tree farm. You know what I mean? Like, she's the other girl. She's the girlfriend that gets dumped. And so because of that, she is very cynical. She is ambitious and very self-aware and very unapologetic in it all. Charlie, on the other hand, is just the perfect mix of grumpy and charming. he's very closed off at the start of the book, but actually as Nora and Charlie get to know each other, he does open up, and it actually turns out that he is just a really nice guy, just very socially awkward. The romance as well is also quite slow burn, which I appreciated, and it's just one of those stories that makes you grin like an idiot whilst you're reading it. And it's so nice how, again, she doesn't compromise her own career and her own wants for the man. You know, it's nice to read someone who is willing to compromise and work together to say, okay, well, this is what I want, but that's what you want. How can we make this situation work? And also, it's a book about people in the book world. So again, I've said this a million times before, what's not to love? I love reading books about authors or editors or just anyone in the book sphere. I love it. I lap it up. I need more. But yeah, I had an amazing time reading this book. I think I gave it 4 stars, which might not sound like a lot, but you know when you just get that 5-star feeling? I didn't get that 5-star feeling with this book, but it is by far one of my favourite books in the romance bubble that I have read, and I really, really, really enjoyed it. The second audiobook I listened to was another Emily Henry, and it was Beach Read, and this then completed my Emily Henry collection. I have now read all of her books except for her newest upcoming release, obviously, but this was the last one that was on my list. I didn't enjoy this one quite as much as Book Lovers. It just didn't really gel with me as much, and I'm not sure if that is because I read it immediately after Book Lovers and I was still on the high of that and expecting the same for Beach Read. Maybe if I had just given it a bit of time in between, I would have enjoyed it more, but As it stands, this one was okay. I ended up giving it 3 stars. This one, again, is a little bit of an enemies to lovers. So we have January, who is a romance author, and Augustus, who is like a literary god whose novels have won all sorts of prestigious prizes. At the start of the at the start of the film. At the start of the book, January's father passes away and she finds out that he was actually having a secret affair for years and owns a beach house. So she inherits the beach house and is going to said beach house to clear out all of her dad's stuff and sell it. And Augustus turns out to be her neighbour. So they first met each other in college. They didn't get on very well. And he sort of has the, ew, you're a romance writer? Well, that's not real literature. Snobbery about him. And she's like, well, fuck you. Yes, it is, dickhead. So, yeah, they kind of clash over that. But she has to finish a book by the end of the summer and she is suffering with some pretty severe writer's block. So they decide to switch genres. They each try to write a book in the other's genre. And through that, they become friends. And then, of course, it develops into this romance, etc., etc. It was okay. It wasn't my favourite, like I said. It was just meh. I'm glad I read it. It was a solid 3 stars. I enjoyed it. I would recommend it to people. But there was nothing particularly noteworthy about it, in my opinion. The next audiobook that I listened to then is The Woman in Me by Britney Spears, which is her autobiography. And I don't give ratings to autobiographies, so I haven't got a star rating for this. I just don't feel right rating someone's life experiences. But it was a heartbreaking read. Obviously, I think pretty much everyone on booktube has read this book now. But it just details her rise to fame and all of the issues that she had with her family and the conservatorship, and talks a little bit about the trial and having to go through the process of getting it annulled. It was awful. Some of the things that happened to that woman is just horrific, but at the same time it did also feel very surface level. And I'm not saying that I want her to give us every single detail, because it must have all been a very painful experience, but it would have been nice to hear a little bit more about her childhood and her rise to fame and all of the things that happened there as well. Even throughout it felt like we were very much just skimming the surface. I have got absolutely no doubt that there is probably so much more that hasn't even been touched upon. It was a really enjoyable, very eye-opening read, very heartbreaking as well, but I do recommend it. And the last book that I read then was Days at the Morisaki Bookshop by Yagasawa Satoshi. Now, this book I didn't enjoy too much. It was just pretty bog standard lit fic contemporary novel. I feel very meh about it. I gave it 2 stars because it was a little bit forgettable, to be honest. There wasn't really much of a plot, and I don't think with a lot of lit fic there is a plot so much as a life lesson to be learned. But even then, there didn't really seem to be much that I could take away from the book, and I don't know if that's just me not having enough brain cells to understand what the lesson was. But it was just a little bit pointless, to be honest. So the main character at the start of the book is broken up with. Her boyfriend tells her that, oh, by the way, you were actually my side chick and me and my actual girlfriend are now getting married, so off you fuck. And that just completely upends her whole life. She quits her job and she just falls into this depression for months, and her uncle phones her one day and says, hey, by the way, I run the family bookshop, I need some help, can you come and give me a hand? You can live here for free whilst you do it. And she's like, you know what, yeah, because I quit my job because of a guy, And that was quite stupid, and I live in Tokyo, which is one of the most expensive cities in the world, so I probably should, because now I have no money. So she goes to live with her uncle, or she goes to live at the bookshop that is run by her uncle. It's been in the family for years, and it's all just really about her healing, her coming out of that depression and starting to make friends again and starting to integrate herself back into the world. And she does that very slowly as she picks up books and starts to read the stories within them. So that was the first half of the book, and that was a kind of nice story, but then halfway through it, it sort of shifts, and her uncle's wife, who disappeared like 10 years before, just up and left them one day, then comes back, and she's like, by the way, I'm still alive, here I am, and I want to be your wife again. And then it's about her getting to know her aunt, and it didn't really make sense. Like, I just lost all interest at that point. I was kind of like, well, the story that I was here for originally is now sort of done, and there isn't really anything else for me in it. It just felt like a little bit of a slog after that. So I don't want to be one of those people that are like, I didn't like it because I didn't get it, but at the same time, I didn't get the point behind it. Like, I didn't see why it was necessary. So yeah, I ended up giving it 2 stars. I don't think I'll continue on. It's like a little bit of a series, or not so much a series, I think rather just like companion novels. And I don't think I'll continue on and read any of them because it was just very flat, very bland. There wasn't really anything to any of the characters. They were all very one-dimensional. There was no depth to any of them. So yeah, there's not really anything that's making me want to pick up the next one at all. So guys, that's it. Those were my February reads. I think getting through 10 books in a month was great. I think March is probably going to be the last big reading month for me, where I can actually sit down and do something like that. My reading sort of tapers off in the summer months, so I don't think that there's very many 10 book months left until we get into like September, October. However, we are currently sitting at 20 books. Yes, 20 books for the year, which I think is about 8 or 9 books ahead of schedule, which is amazing. It's not going to stay like that, so don't be too impressed. But for now, it's pretty good. I think I'm going to have quite a fantasy heavy month in March. I definitely deserve it after reading through all of those romances in February. So yes, the next video that you see from me will be my March TBR, where I'll pick out all of the books that I want to read. So stay tuned for that. Let me know in the comments, guys, what your favourite reads of the month were. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it, and hit subscribe if you want to see more bookish content from me. I'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys.